Shalom, I'm Doran Ellen Beldotan in Sfatin, Israel. I haven't made a video for a while for a number of reasons. A number of ideas that I've been entertaining, and I wanted them to come clearer in my mind before I express them to others. I also went through one of the most terrible shocks of my life. A 3-year-old child died in a fire in our building on a Shabbat. And had this building not been a poor building that was built to the specifications designated for the poor, a child might not have died. And I was grief-stricken. I wasn't in a position to talk. I still can't talk about what happened that day. It's still that traumatic. But I do want to talk about how to prevent things like that from happening again. I've been hearing some very promising developments. The Arab world is prepared to recognize the existence of the State of Israel and to come to grips with the fact that the state is not going away, and to make peace, to enter into economic relations with us, and to normalize relations. And that is very, very positive. My concern is that that cooperation is going to be primarily economic. And my concern about it being primarily economic is that when Jews get too involved in business, it takes us away from our center. And ultimately, it's not healthy. I'd like to talk about what the State of Israel would look like if this were a genuinely Jewish state. And some of you may actually be surprised at what a genuine Jewish state would look like. Because so much effort has been put into steering Jews away from our purpose in this world, and parallel to that, making the Gentile world look at us and say, see, all the Jews want is money. They tell us that without money we'll be swallowed by the Gentiles, and then they tell the Gentiles, look at the Jews, all they want is money. So let's talk about what a real Jewish state would look like. First of all, and this is the meta concept, a Jewish state would be a refuge and a haven for the sensitive, the vulnerable, the meek, the humble. It would be a place where it would be safe for us to strip off the armor of our various defense mechanisms, to be ourselves and to cultivate being meek and being humble without fear of thereby becoming victimized and preyed upon. That's what I was hoping for when 37 years ago, I think it is now, I got on a plane and came here. I was looking for a refuge from being a sophisticated New Yorker who knew how to take care of herself. I didn't find that. So the first order of business for a real Jewish state is to be able to be humble and meek, and for those traits to be valued, and for them not to put one in danger from predators. In a Jewish state, the banking system would not be an interest-based banking system. The rabbis had no right to give what's called heter iska, the permission to do business, to the banks, meaning that they were allowed to take interest. Rabbis have no right to overwrite God's law. God's law is eternal. It's true in every generation. It's always current. It's always contemporary. You know? And so our banking system would not loan on interest. There would be investments, and investments most certainly could bear interest, because a banking system is supposed to be based on human interaction in which people positively invest their time, their effort, and in all ventures, and that bears fruit quite naturally. The banking system is supposed to work like that too. So that's the first order of business, that the banking system would not lend on interest. There are private lenders. They're called gamachim, gemilut chasadim, the giving of loving kindness, where they're interest-free loans, as should be. But in a really Jewish state, the banking system would not lend on interest. Second, those commodities which are necessities for life would not be able to be sold for more than 1/6 above cost. That's Jewish law. Now, of course, in modern times, we would have to sit and deliberate about what we presume to be the necessities of life. Different people have different diets, but we know that we all need clothing, we all need housing. It could be deliberated how much space, how much clothing, what food items, and to be fair, some food items in Israel are subsidized, that are considered the basic basket of goods. Some don't have any taxes put on them. But in a Jewish economy, it would be decided what the basics of life are, and no more than 1/6 profit would be taken on that. We would have a democracy in a Jewish state, but it would be a very different kind of democracy than exists now. Communities would suggest who they would like to be their representatives based on familiarity with people as members of the community who have proven themselves to be exemplars of morality within the community and have gone above and beyond the basics of what is required to serve their communities out of love. People who the community trusts, people who the community knows personally, And those people would become our representatives, whether they liked it or not. In other words, there would be a draft for people to become representatives of the community. There would be no politicians who suggested themselves as leaders. People would have to choose someone. Now, experience has taught me that the very people who most need to be our representatives are those who are least desiring of that position. They tend to be humble people, so they would have to be drafted if they didn't want to serve, because they would do the job really well. And there wouldn't be a prime minister. There would be what we call in Hebrew a moitza. It would be a council. It would be a wise council who would confer one with the other and make decisions. Now, for various reasons, they among themselves may choose a particular representative who has particular talents to represent us to other governments in certain areas. This one's very good at economics. This one's very good at technology. This one is very good, I don't know, this one knows maritime law. I don't know what. And the best person for any particular representation would be chosen, but the moitza. And I would consider a wise moitza to be different numbers of people for different decisions. There might be 3 for some decisions, 5 for some decisions, 7 for some decisions, 13 for some decisions. By the way, the Supreme Court works very much on that system. We'll get to what the court system would look like in a moment. But this is the way the government would run in a really Jewish state. The courts. The judges, too, would be chosen by the community, not one by the other, you know, friend brings a friend kind of a thing. The judges would be chosen by their communities based on their sterling moral acumen, moral performance, intellectual ability, ability to analyze. And they would be the judges. Now, the judges wouldn't sit in their own community because there might be some doubt about whether or not there would be some kind of tendency to favor people or to be inhibited by the fact that these people know you and so forth and so on. So we could switch communities, and like people from the Negev would send their judges up the north, and the north would send their judges down to Tel Aviv and around that way. But everyone who was chosen as a judge would be someone who their own community, people who know them, live with them, see how they perform as members of the community, would have chosen. There would be no lawyers in Israel. Does that surprise you? The Talmud states very clearly that being a lawyer is not an admirable, respectable profession. And I agree with that. So judges would not have once been lawyers, and there would be no lawyers. The Talmud calls lawyers ochei hadayanin. Today they're called ochei din, but originally they're called ochei hadayanin. In other words, those who set up and edit the way the judges might make a decision. In other words, manipulators. And judges are advised not to behave like the ochei hadayanin. Don't judge people according to cleverness, but according to righteousness. So there would be no lawyers. There might be advisors, there might be some kind of, like in rabbinical courts, they have sort of like coaches that might be necessary, but not a lawyer profession. There wouldn't be a whole corpus of lawyers. That would be out. We would have to have a very serious and deep review of Jewish law. It is not acceptable that the state of Israel has pell-mell and willy-nilly taken on laws from the Ottoman Empire, from America, from Britain, and put them together, and Jewish law itself was completely neglected. Some have said that they did that because the Jewish people didn't want to be ruled by Jewish law. Well, we were never asked. Had I been asked, what I would have said to them is, I recognize the fact that Jewish law, such as it got frozen sometime in the Middle Ages, cannot be immediately applicable. However, some laws are universals, and they are immediately applicable. So let's use them. And let's review the other laws so that we can bring them up to modern needs and modern standards, and apply them appropriately to our times. Let's look at the spirit of morality in which those laws were formulated, to know how to adapt them, and to know we might have to archive some of them and not use them. They wouldn't be stricken off the books. They would be archived for historical reasons, and who knows, maybe someday something will arise and we can look at those old laws and see the thinking, the moral discussions that went into them, and decide whether or not they can be updated. I realize that that would be a monumental undertaking. I think that the Jewish people as a whole should be involved in that process. Anything that is put in the hands of a small group of people who work in closed chambers is dangerous. There are enough of us in the general community who are familiar with Jewish law that we would be able to have some input, each to their own ability and accomplishments, and having the benefit of life experience and good intentions and so forth and so on. We could all make a contribution to that. Now, that kind of a monumental undertaking would of course require that we had the repose to be able to have free time to do that. And so to that purpose, I see the increased use of artificial intelligence as something very positive. But again, that has to be watched. We have to ask ourselves, what kinds of investments are we making? I know that there's going to be a huge technological food revolution. I have not gotten solid answers about what that means in terms of healthy, organic, hydroponic or aeroponic planting. I don't know whether or not they mean the use of more advanced chemicals and so forth. If so, then those are not wise investments. I think that it should become clear to the listener that there is a difference between Jewish wisdom and Jewish cleverness. And Jewish wisdom must always take precedence because the cleverness exists. The know-how exists. The question is whether or not we have developed ourselves morally to use that to use those abilities wisely and well for everyone, not just for Israel, for everyone, because we're very definitely going to be developing much more of an international market, more than ever before. And wisdom, foresight, being able to see the pitfalls is going to be of the essence. Because as the technology advances, it gives us more freedom, potentially, but it can also lock us down and make us more dependent upon it on the other. And there must always be an out. There must always be, no matter how highly evolved technologically the food production becomes, it must always be possible for us to grow a tomato if we have to. By hand, the old-fashioned way. Some have said that Israeli chutzpah is a very, very good thing for business. I opened up my discussion of what a Jewish state would look like by saying that most comprehensively, this would be a society of refuge and protection of those who have devoted their lives to the development of meekness and humility. Chutzpah has historically not been viewed by Jews as a desirable trait. What is a desirable trait is having the courage to fight for justice. That, yes. But being chutzpahdik has historically been looked at as, being a presta-mensch, being how do you say it in English? Like a rough and tough kind of low-life kind of a character. The opposite of being cultured, And it is not our way to culture chutzpah. It is our way to culture humility and meekness, to seek wisdom more than know-how, and to champion the widow and the orphan, the old person, the infirm, all of those who need our protection most. These things do not go out of style. As in judgment, where there isn't allowed to be what's called maso panim, which means looking at what a person's stature is and recognizing their stature in the decisions, but to judge everyone fairly on equal ground. So on the sociological level, there has to be. There are benefits that are given to the widows of servicemen in the army and in the police and so forth and so on that are not afforded to ordinary widows. This is not a Jewish idea. What would the soldier be without the person who worked in the factory who made their shoes? What would the policeman be were it not for the farmer and his wife who works next to him in the field? And so if, God forbid, a woman who was a farmer's wife or was a shoemaker's wife or a tailor's wife, maybe these are old professions, but you understand what I mean. If such a woman becomes a widow, it is absolutely forbidden to give her second status or less protection, sociological protection, than the wives of people in the armed services. This is simply not a Jewish idea. And finally, I would like to see Israel have an army the way a country like Iceland might have an army, or I don't know, Denmark. To have it but not need it. And according to our Holy Torah, the age of the draft is 20, not 18. And there shouldn't be a draft at all. We should be in a peaceful society in which people volunteer just to do basic guarding should there be need, but certainly not from the age of 18. There's a big difference between an 18-year-old and a 20-year-old. At that age, people are developing so quickly that those 2 years really are critical. And that is the way, if Israel were a Jewish state, it would look. And please, dear God, we will grow into that. It's very, very important that we not allow the excitement over the new economic age that's coming in to lead us away from our core values. Jewish morality is eternal. It will never ever go out of style. It will never ever be overridden by any technology. It will never be overridden by any other law system or set of sociological circumstances, and we have to come to a very mature and clear-headed, emotionally balanced approach to retaining Jewish law, even as we usher in a new technology. Needless to say, it is central Jewish law that anything that is not only known to be dangerous, but even potentially dangerous physically, is forbidden. If it is determined by scientists that the public trust that 5G is in fact very dangerous and can cause widespread harm, then certainly the argument that we have to roll it out because others are rolling it out and we have to keep up with the Joneses simply holds no water. These sabbatical years have to be observed in accordance with God's law. No rabbi has the right to declare pros bool and say that lenders can continue to lend on sabbatical years. No human has the right to make that decision. And the fact that that decision was taken has caused incalculable pain and destruction and poverty and misery. There is no place for pros bool in the world. And we have to go back to the old-fashioned way of keeping the sabbatical year. We should grow our own produce hydroponically and aeroponically, or maybe using other technologies that are halachically allowed during the sabbatical years. And we have to nullify all debts. That means that no debts are involved with interest at all under any circumstances. And so we're not talking about the principal and the interest. We're talking about the entire debt gets wiped out during the sabbatical year. That's right. That's what God said. And God knows better than you rabbis what's best for us. The state of Israel is more than 50 years old. And that means that a Jubilee year occurred in the time in which the state of Israel has existed. And there was no celebration of it whatsoever. since we don't know exactly when the Jubilee year is, let's just willy-nilly say it's the next sabbatical year. And that's it. Why not? We have to scour our holy texts carefully to determine how land ownership should best be divided in keeping with Hashem's will. But it is absolutely necessary that the people who live in Israel have a piece of land, a real holding, an actual holding. Not that we can lease it from no. Torah says that those who sit in the land of Israel have a piece of land, an actual piece of land. And that is the way it must be. There has to be a very, very deep discussion about how that will be divided, how that will be brought about. These are not simple matters. I don't want to even proffer a suggestion about how it should be. It is not simple. How this would be for Jews, how it would be for Toshavim. The book of Ruth tells us exactly how it comes about for converts. We need to sit down and have a very, very serious discussion. Everyone who is considered an Ezrach in Israel, that comes with a real piece of land, a real holding. Torah is not a book of spirituality. It is a book of actuality, and actuality means that you have an actual piece of land on your name. We have to have a very serious discussion about that, and that's got to be done, because the current way of doing it is absolutely, it's a recipe for povertization, and I think it was intended to be. Torah is a recipe for enrichment, and that is the way it must be. I should like to end this video with an anecdote, which I think describes perfectly what the real Jewish approach to money is. The Gaon from Vilna was the recognized genius of his generation. He owned a grocery store, and it is said of him that every day, except of course Shabbat, he would go to his grocery store and open it up and keep it open until he had made just enough money for what he needed for that day. And then he would close up shop and he would go home and learn. That's a Jew. That is the model that we must all internalize and emulate and embody. The real Jewish approach to money has always been neither to come to what's called cheopat ra'av, which is the humiliation of hunger. In Jewish tradition, poverty is considered a liken to death. It's like a living death. And so we Jews do not intentionally impoverish ourselves and certainly not others. But on the other hand, neither do we ever allow involvement in business to take 1 minute away from our Torah learning and from giving of our time to people who need it, to our loved ones. It is not the Jewish way to either be so poor that we cannot live in a dignified way as Jews, nor be so rich that we cannot live in a dignified way as Jews. Thank you for listening. Brachot, blessings. Blessings of peace, blessings of prosperity, blessings of abundance, blessings of the freedom to actualize the gifts that God has given us.